What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and we're back with another episode of Poker Hands, and today we're going to be taking a look at a hand that caused Phil Ivey to bust the 2018 WSOP main event. This hand was covered by Poker Go, but unfortunately they were unable to get pre-flop, flop, turn, and part of the river. So we have the full hand, and we have the conclusion of the hand, but we're going to have to get a little creative on some of the video footage that leads us to the river. Luckily, here at PolkerNews Productions, we have the exact technology required for us to simulate this hand. Let's go ahead and roll the clip.
Phil Ivey has raised it up.
It's a 3-bet.
Ivey casually calls his raise.
Our hand begins with Phil Ivey opening up pocket nines to 22,000 at a 10,000 chip big blind, certainly the standard play. Now it folds to a player in the hijack where Brian Altman looks down at Queen Jack offsuit, and here he decides to get a little loose and make a move on Phil Ivey. You really should not be 3-betting Queen Jack offsuit out of the hijack. It's simply too loose. Maybe if you wanted to make a play on a very weak player, you could do something like this, but in general, I would advocate against it. And you're playing against Phil Ivey. You're not playing against some complete random. Ivey's going to play at least somewhat tough, so I would probably not recommend, I would not recommend making this move. Action folds back around to Phil Ivey, who does decide to make the call, certainly the standard play here with pocket nines, and let's take a flop.
So Ivey actually flops pair nines, so he's going to check.
He's reaching for chips because he knows exactly what's going on here. Looking to attack what looks like a weak play.
Phil Ivey hasn't moved, but look at those eyes.
If he does believe he's in front, he can just call and see what happens, right?
There it is. He makes the call, so...
The flop comes Queen Jack deuce with 2 spades. Ivey flops essentially worse than middle pair, and Altman flops top 2, a huge flop here for his Queen Jack offsuit. At this point, Altman decides to bet 60,000, and I like the play. You want to use a size that's a little on the smaller side here so that you can bet with some bluffs. Maybe if you had a hand like ace king, you could try and take it down. And then also, if he has a good hand, you might incentivize some weaker holdings to get in there and give you some value. The action back over to Ivey, and Ivey looks perplexed. He just doesn't seem to believe that his opponent can have this top pair. You can see it on his face. The problem is here, though, in Ivey's shoes, you have a pretty bad hand to deal with aggression. Yeah, it's not the biggest bet, but at the same time, you block a bunch of the potential bluffs like king 9 suited or 10 9 suited or 9 8 suited, maybe some flush draws, maybe some backdoor flush draws. All in all, I really don't like continuing here with this hand. I know it sucks. But this is why the middle pocket pairs are so hard to play, and you can't get too attached to them. The good news is that in Ivey's range, he has all kinds of hands that connect here. He's going to call this raise with any suited Broadway, and all of those hands continue. He can also have a few spades hands that might decide to continue as well, and once in a while, perhaps he flops a set too. But anyway, Ivey's not buying what Brian is selling, and let's take a turn.
It's an 8.
Ivey check called the flop. Now checks again.
He checks behind. Jessica.
We both check.
Check.
There you go. Welcome back.
The turn comes the 8 of spades, which completes the flush. A very dangerous card here for both players. Now their opponent could absolutely have moved into the lead with either a 10-9 for a straight or with a flush. Ivey checks once again over to Brian, and now Brian has to make a decision with his top 2, and it's not super crystal clear what he should do. In general, I probably lean towards betting to get a little bit of value, but I think checking is a good play too. You play pot control, you can definitely get a bet in on the river, and you want to make sure you don't put yourself in a very difficult spot if you do get check raised. One of the reasons I do like a bet here is that I don't think it's very likely Ivey has a flush in this spot when he opened from mid position. I think ace king of spades is probably going to 4-bet here pre-flop, and outside of that, yeah, he can have a few queen x of spades hands, maybe once in a while a 10-9 suited, but there aren't too many hands that have him beat. So really, you can't go wrong here either way. I don't mind playing it conservatively with a check, which Brian does, and let's take a river.
Phil Ivey tends to play a pretty loose game.
Now the river.
I like to see Phil check here. I think he has checked. Yep. Good check there.
He's not slowing down. Going for value.
Here we go.
And Ivey ships it. Ivey is all in.
The river comes to 3 of diamonds, and Phil Ivey, bored with how long the turn took, has been getting a massage. Ivey checks it once again over to his opponent with pocket nines, and now Queen Jack has a crystal clear value bet. Your opponent almost certainly has a hand like a jack, or maybe a hand like 10s or 9s, maybe a queen that didn't want to bet the river, but you're very rarely going to be beat except for a few hands that might be trapping you. Brian agrees with this line of logic and does decide to bet the river to the tune of 195,000. Now the action is back over to Ivey, and he's got a pretty rough decision to make. His opponent maybe could be bluffing him with a hand like ace-king, ace-10, maybe some kind of low-suited connector. In fact, if Brian's 3-betting queen-jack offsuit, he could absolutely show up with a hand like 7-6 of hearts here, so there are many different possible hands that he could be bluffing with. Also, if Brian had a particularly strong hand, he's likely to bet the turn. A flush, a straight, a set, these hands are all pretty likely to bet on the turn when he checks. So it's very likely that in this spot he has a hand like aces, kings, maybe occasionally a 2-pair, and once in a blue moon a trap. Now the question becomes, should Phil Ivey fold, call, or raise? And you guys are used to it around here on the channel, so the answer is it's just actually fold or raise. I don't think he should call here. And the reason is because 9s doesn't make a lot of sense as a call hand. He's going to have better hands to call with, like a jack or maybe occasionally a queen. And then additionally, if he even had a hand like ace-8 of clubs, for example, that's a better call hand because he blocks more of the value range. With 9s, you don't really block too many good hands. If your opponent had a straight or a flush, they were going to be betting the turn. So really, your hand doesn't matter too much from a card removal standpoint. Now, it does block some flushes, which is good, and you certainly want to try and block those knighted hands, but I would prefer to use a hand with a higher spade, something with the ace of spades or king of spades. These would be better bluff candidates than using pocket 9s. So I actually think Ivey should fold here, but if once in a while he wants to make a move, we all know Phil Ivey. Before we go over to talking about what Brian should do, it's important to know we've discussed a lot on this channel about being willing to make some moves. This is one of those spots where a lot of people refuse to bluff because they might think, oh, it just looks like I know I'm beat and I'm trying to make a move. But you have to create your range effectively. You've got to put a couple nut flushes in here as Phil Ivey so that you can trap this spot and check raise all in, and maybe even really any flush is fine here, and then work in some bluffs too. That's the mark of a great player. Not just raising when you've got the goods. That's easy. Anyone can do that. It's about creating a range that can have some bluffs here, like maybe pocket 9s if Ivey wants to use those, and then working in those value bets like flushes or maybe even a straight. And when you do that, you start to make it scary for people to bet. You don't want to be betting thin for value here with ace queen or king queen if you think your opponent's going to raise you a lot. No, then what's your bet really accomplishing? Are you going to bet call? Probably not. But do you have to now? That's what you want your opponent to be thinking. Put the pressure on them by being aggressive and creating good ranges. But remember, you have to mainly value bet in this spot, because if you don't, your opponent can just start not believing you, and then these moves are going to get pretty expensive. Back over to Brian. This is clear. You check the turn, you got a relevant spade blocker, top 2. This is a no-brainer must call, and you can't be afraid of making these calls in big tournaments because against good players, they'll make moves, and you don't want to underestimate weaker opposition. Yeah, I understand you're playing Phil Ivey, so you're a little more sure he's capable of making a move than some other players, but this is why you have hands that are stronger to check back and bet the river to call. You can't bet fold hands like this because then what are you calling? There need to be some hands that can bet call. A hand that might want to bet fold, for example, is something like king queen of hearts, or maybe even ace queen of hearts, something with no relevant card removal. But here, you block a bunch of the flushes with the queen of spades, and you have top 2 pair. This one is a slam dunk bet call.
I empathize with Neep there. Rough one as we go to some outer table action. Ivey all in for 629K. Oh, my.
My goodness. The Spaniard collects the pot as a feature.
Whoa. Wow.
Top
is it a
2
10?
against the 9. It sure needs to be, doesn't it?
It needs to be a pure 10. Could be an ace of spades. Could be a 10. Wow.
Goodness. But by the way, there is plenty out there that beats Altman while he blocks the pocket queens and jacks,
absolutely is.
the pocket deuces, the 9-10, and the spades. all rate to be in there.
Do you
As we
think
bring
it's-
you up to speed on how this one came down.
Yeah,
it was
please.
an open to 22,000 by Ivey. Altman 3-clicked to 75,000. Ivey
Okay.
flatted. Check called a 60K bet on the flop.
It's 50-50. It's the ace of spades or the 9 of clubs. Go on, Ollie.
Check on the turn, and here we are, where Ivey
Nines are
checked
possible. Wow,
stuff
so interesting.
against the 195K bet on the
After
river.
the check, somewhat capped turn range, possibly removing some of the flushes from Altman's range. Maybe Ivey feels comfortable with 9-10, but maybe Ivey is bluffing with 9-9. Let's see, Ollie.
Altman makes the call.
That looks like it's going to be good, Ollie. It was the bluff.
And that's it.
Oh, that'll do it for Phil Ivey. Wow.
Good hand, buddy. Nice playing with you.
Was the 9s. I don't fault that choice. It's a hell of a choice.
Brian does make the call, eliminating Phil Ivey from this year's main event, and it looks like you're going home, Jerome. Thanks for joining me today for Poker Hands. I'm going to be streaming some video games over on Twitch again today. If you want to stop by, you can do so at 5 p.m. Pacific time. I'll put a link in the description below. See ya.